Hello everyone and welcome back to the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. It's Hayden here. I've just returned from Pro Tour New Jersey where honestly had the most amazing time, the most amazing weekend. And, heading into Pro Tour New Jersey, there was a lot of talk about the meta and where we were at with the ban and suspended announcement coming just 3 weeks before Pro Tour and the calling in New Jersey. And eventually it shook out to be pretty interesting, a really interesting top 8. If you haven't checked out the coverage, I recommend going and doing so. You can see that on Channel 5's Twitch, I believe, and some uploads starting to hit YouTube as well. But with Pro Tour in the books, we're headed into ProQuest Season 2 now. And we're already 1 week in. As I record this, we're hitting the second week now, and we've got 2 more weeks left. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the meta and some decks that I think are good options to pick up and play for this ProQuest season. Now, I did this back in Season 1. I looked at sort of 5 decks heading into the ProQuest season that I thought were good picks. And now heading past Pro Tour New Jersey after a lot of testing, and as we head into this, I guess a kind of newish format, really, as we head before Uprising. Out of Pro Tour New Jersey, we have a lot of info to look at. We have a lot of decks and lists to take in and have a look at. I want to choose sort of the 5 picks that I think are really good options for the remainder of the ProQuest season with you. Now, before we dive into that, I'm going to look at a little bit of data heading out of New Jersey and just some basis, some grounding as to why I think some of these options are good options. But before that, if you're enjoying what we're doing here at Arsenal Pass, you like the videos we put out, you like the podcast we do weekly, make sure to give the video, a big thumbs up, a big like, and if you're not already subscribed to the channel, then please do. Let's get into it and look at, coming off the back of Pro Tour New Jersey, where is the meta right now? Now, when you're trying to choose a deck to take into any given Flesh and Blood event, I think the biggest thing you need to start with is, what am I expecting to play against? And I'm going to throw up on the screen just the data we have from the meta, from the calling, from the Pro Tour New Jersey. And there's a few interesting things. So where do you start? What are you expecting? I think this can inform us of the sort of the decks, the types of lists that we should look at as we head into ProQuest season. Just think a bit about the expected meta. So if you look really interesting in New Jersey, you can see here in New Jersey, the Bravo star of the show, as people anticipated, was the big piece of the meta pie heading into this. Nearly 40% of the meta, I think, didn't surprise many people. We saw a lot of Chane as well, and then Prism. So those big 3 that had kind of been talked about, over the last sort of month or so. Chane replacing Viscerai once that ban and suspended announcement happened. People really understanding how strong Chane is. And then after that, you have 5% of the meta being Lexi as like the next most played deck, which is, Briar at 5.9%, then Lexi as the most played decks, which is really interesting. But if you contrast that with an open event like the calling, you see some real interesting shifts here where Prism slightly less represented, Bravo significantly less represented at 20%. Same with Chane, less represented as well. And then you see decks like Briar, like Lexi, even Viscerai gaining more representation. And I think you can expect this in any sort of open meta. And when I say open, I mean like an open entry event like the calling, as opposed to an invitational event like the Pro Tour. And I think a big part of that is because people are more comfortable to play things that, they want to try and experiment things they may be more used to. You're just going to get an open meta in general. So really important to keep that in mind when you're thinking about your ProQuest meta heading into these events. And something that I'm thinking about when I think about these 5 decks that I'm looking at. Now, if you look at the day 2 meta for the Pro Tour, you see like Prism, for instance, converted really well. Bravo star of the show converted really well. So did Chane. A lot of the smaller decks that were represented really did drop off a bit. But what this shows us is just the fact that these 3 are going to be present. You're going to see them and you're going to encounter them. So with all this in mind, what 5 decks do I think you should probably look at for this ProQuest season? All right. Number 1 on my list, first up, it's got to be Chane. Chane just took out the Pro Tour, and I already thought this was quite a strong option heading into the Pro Tour. There was a number of teams and groups and testing groups that talked about, were they like team star of the show? Were they team Chane? Ultimately, Chane ends up taking out the Pro Tour, and I don't necessarily think that means that Chane is the strongest deck in the format. I still think Bravo star of the show is really, really powerful. But I think Chane gives you this opportunity to prey on a lot of other decks. We've seen the representation of Prism. We just talked about it. A lot of Prisms showing up in ProQuest Season 2, in the calling, and even the Pro Tour. Prism is around. So I think Chane is probably, especially for week 2, week 3, the best option to take into the meta, in my view anyway, just in terms of what it can do into both Prism, but then also into Mirror if you've got the sort of right setup, plus Bravo star of the show. And we're going to take a look at a deck list at the moment and have a look through that. But I think Chane is a good starting spot if you're looking for something that probably has really good percentage spots into the current meta. All right, up on screen here, I've got Pablo Pintor, the Pro Tour #1 champions deck list. And I mean, you can't go past it, right? It just won the Pro Tour. Now, I think Pablo's list is really interesting. It's set up quite well to play into Prism, I think, which is where you want to be, just given what we talked about with where Prism is in this meta. You've got natural ability with Lead the Charge. Now, I think Lead the Charge is just a really good card in general because it doesn't break the chain, so it's also really strong into fatigue. So I think if you're going to play Chane, play Lead the Charges in your deck, blues, yellows, whatever it might be. I think yellow is probably the best just based on what you've got available in your list. And then one thing I really like about Pablo's list is no unmovables. I don't think unmovable is good into Star of the Show. I think it clogs up your arsenal. It stops you from playing that proactive game plan. Husk is your best weapon against Star of the Show. And just aggro, tempo, that's what you want to do with Chane. The matchup's really close, but that Husk is what's going to drive it for you. So I think Pablo's list is a great place to start. If I was to change any cards, I don't love the Yellow Mothrin Skies, but I understand completely why they're in his list. I really like the 6 Belittles. I think make sure you're playing those. They're really good into aggressive mirrors. But if you are looking to maybe change some of those cards, maybe you're looking for a bit of a different edge. One thing I really liked at the Pro Tour that Michael Hamilton and Matthew Folks did is that they played a slightly different, more patient list. They played cards like Vexing Malice. Michael didn't even play Shadow Puppetry, which I'm a big fan of. I don't actually love Shadow Puppetry, just the way I don't think it's very good into the fatigue matchup because you have to break the chain to play it. And shout out to Michael Hamilton for coming up with that one and just being a real advocate of how much he doesn't like that card. So I think Pablo's list is a great place to start. But if you're looking for something that might have maybe a bit of an edge into people trying to fatigue you, maybe even into the mirror with a bit more patient sort of playstyle, cards like Vexing Malice and more Lead the Charges could be a good place to start and look at with these lists. With Chane winning the Pro Tour, I think a really good option for the remaining weeks of sort of this ProQuest season to try and take advantage of that is Ice Lexi. Now, we saw Lexi show up in some numbers for both the Calling and the Pro Tour. Ultimately, not an amazing conversion rate, no Lexi in the top 8, but Yuki Lee Bender put up a top 32 result and a really good performance with an Ice Lexi list that I really like and I think is a good option to take into this coming sort of last 2 weeks of the ProQuest season. Now, the reason I think Lexi's in a good spot is because the ice builds can really prey on these chains and these other rune blades and just force them to have to play on your terms, play on the Lexi's terms. I also don't think you have a terrible matchup into Prism or Star of the Show. Although I'm not an expert on Lexi, haven't played it as much, but in testing, I felt like Star of the Show was not amazing, but not completely unwinnable. And then into Prism, it felt pretty close. Especially I like Lexi. I like Yuki's Lexi list for this very reason. So let's take a look at the list. Pop it up here on screen. You can see just a really strong sort of plan. A good amount of ice cards coming out of this build. And you've got a lot of options with like Blizzard Bolts and Chilling Ice Veins, and these cards are really strong, especially into decks that can't defend that well. So particularly into Star of the Show and to Chane, these are the ways that you try to gain tempo and keep it. Plus you've got some just really strong red arrows, Daring Shot. You've got Pathing Helix even in the list as well. Endless Arrow is just an amazing card. Plus Rain Razors and Art of Wars to really bump those attacks up and have these really big turns. So I think this is the sort of list I would look at if I was going to play Lexi this weekend, and I think it's a really good option for the current meta. Being the most played, and it's the most played for a reason, Bravo Star of the Show is still one of the strongest, most powerful sort of heroes you can play in this current format. It just does something that is so strong and causes your opponent to have to answer a question, and sometimes you just do the thing, and you just get to fuse multiple turns in a row. Definitely experienced that in the Pro Tour, unfortunately. And on that note, I think it's still a really good option to take into the remaining weeks of ProQuest. I think the sort of lists that are coming out now have reasonable matchups into Prism as well. The Chane matchup is not bad by any means, and then you just have to sort of put up with the mirrors and understand how to play those. And honestly, not my favorite match to play the mirror, but I think if you're looking at a deck that's sort of pretty reasonable to pick up and play, you can learn the ins and outs of, and have a really powerful strategy. Bravo Star of the Show is pretty hard to go past, and it's about to hit Living Legends, so why not take it for a final outing this ProQuest season? Now, popping up on the screen here is Isaac Kroot's list from the Pro Tour Top 8. Isaac Kroot and his team, along with the Canadian sort of group of Toronto, they played this list, and I think this list is really strong. It's really consistent. You can see interesting cards like Yellow Heaven's Claws, just a 3-block that's lightning, that does the job that you need it to. You've got the defense reactions in the form of Staunch Response and Turn Timbers that are really strong, and then just good elemental-based cards to allow you to do the thing, to activate Bravo Star of the Show, use Oakenolds, come in with the damage you need to. Plus, you've got cards like Blank and stuff for the Prism matchup. Although I would say their list in particular maybe a little bit less good against Prism. So maybe if you are worried about how many Prisms are coming into this meta, start to look at maybe fitting in some Lead the Charges in here. Could be a way to look at it. They don't play the blue Lead the Charge in this list. That could be something that you look at doing. So otherwise, the other thing I would look at just with the rise of Kano is probably to put Shock Charmers in this list somewhere. Find some space for that card. really strong into what the Kano decks are trying to do, whether it's the Alexander Vol list, whether it's the list that we played at the PT, Sasha, Brendan, and myself. A good option to look at. Prism, the Light Illusionist, she never seems to go away, and for good reason. You know, a really powerful inherent strategy you have with Prism, and with Everfest and the new blue auras and everything else that she's gained, still a force to be reckoned with. We saw one copy get into the top 8 of the Pro Tour. We saw copies of the top 8 at the Calling, and we've seen it do really well in ProQuest Season 2, Week 1, and show up at the Calling. And I don't think that's going to change for the next 2 weeks of ProQuest Season 2, so expect to play against it. But also, maybe why not play it? Prism still does the thing, right? Prism is still a good option, I think. I know leading into the Pro Tour, the conversation was from a lot of people, Prism's kind of dead, Prism's not very good. I've always been in the opinion that Prism is still playable and still something that you can look to do just because of the raw power of it. But you have to understand that you do have a weaker matchup into some of the Rune Blades, and maybe you want to try and tweak and sort of make your deck a bit better to play into those. But at what cost are you giving up your matchup against things like Star of the Show? So a really important balance. Now I'm throwing up William Kubik's deck here. William top-aided the Pro Tour, of course, and I really like this list. I think it's really tight. It's really similar to sort of the lists I was playing last season in the ProQuest. And one thing I really like about these kind of lists is that they just do what Prism wants to do with the Aura Plan really, really well. You don't have sort of ancillary sort of cards that are clogging it up. Really light on reds, which I like because reds are kind of the death of the deck. They're the ones that cause you to have awkward hands and have problems in trying to enact your plan. Now, looking at 24 blues here and then a pretty minimal number of reds. One thing you could look at with this list is even chopping down on some blues. I think that's not terrible in this meta. Although be aware of Kano, maybe you do want to have the higher blue count. But I could see maybe chucking in some more yellow heralds into this list instead of maybe some of the blue heralds. Maybe 2, maybe 3 max. Just changing up the ratios a little bit. Otherwise, I really like this list. I like what William's doing with just the 2 sync belows and the 2 unmovables. I don't really like defense reactions in Prism. I think they sort of clog up what you're trying to do. I much prefer to be pretty aggressive into decks like Chane and Briar, try and get the initiative and go from there. I think there were some fatigue plans running around at the Pro Tour. You can enact this plan if you want to, and you can go and look at lists. I know Tyler Horsepool, a few others play this plan. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that plan. I think it's really hard to beat experienced Chane players, especially these Chane players that understand how powerful cards like Lead the Charge are. But I think it is a plan. Saying that, the reason I've chosen Williams' deck here is I think it's a really strong and just a really tight list and a good place to be the remaining 2 weeks of ProQuest Season 2. All right, number 5 on my list. So many decks I think I could put in here that could sneak into that top 5. I think Kano is still a good option, although you're going to have to be prepared for these next 2 weeks to face a lot more sort of Arcane Barrier, a lot more Spell Void, which in honesty is the more annoying piece to face, especially with the combo deck that we played at the Pro Tour. But maybe into Alexander's deck, like we saw in the Pro Tour top 8, Arcane Barrier might be a bit more annoying. So expect to see that either way. I think Kano is still a reasonable choice. I would still play our deck into the meta, but I think it has gotten a little bit worse, and you're going to have to work a lot harder and understand, and practice the reps into Arcane Barrier 3, Spell Void 2, etc. Dash is another deck that I really like, and I'm probably going to be playing at a ProQuest next weekend. But I am going to make a separate video about the Dash deck that I worked on for the Pro Tour. I really like it. I've played it so much now that at this point, to be honest, I'm kind of overplaying it. So I will probably still play it for at least one ProQuest because I do like it and I do think it is very good. In saying that, other than that, the other one I do want to talk about, and it's going to take number 5 for me, sort of on this 5 decks to play for ProQuest Season 2 list, is Briar. I think Briar is in a really strong spot right now. You have the ability to, and we saw it at the Pro Tour. Of course, we had Jacob Shaker top 8 with the deck, and we also had a copy in the Calling top 8 as well. Very sort of more traditional Channel Mount Heroic, aggressive redline decks with blues to play your Channel Mount Heroic. I think these are still good. You have a really strong proactive game plan. You can play well into Chane. You're really good into Prism. You're still pretty good into Starvo. Briar is this deck to me that is like, you can get pretty close to 50-50 with all the major decks in the format, but then you're really good against Prism. And also, it's not easy to battle into Channel Mount Heroic. And when you have those draws, they're really powerful. So I think Briar is in a really interesting spot where I don't think it is necessarily the best deck in the format, but I think is a really viable option and has these really powerful turns. And if you play really tight on the deck, you can also get your sort of close matchups, even when you don't draw as well, to be, you can be in the game and win those games. And that's the reason I really like the idea of playing Briar. Now, there's a couple of ways to play Briar, and the more traditional one is what we saw from Jacob in the top 8, but I'm actually going to throw up the list from Zach Bunn and the Team Covenant guys who played at the Pro Tour and the Calling. Zach ultimately finished 33rd, so close to that top 32, had a really good run. You can see his matches on camera day 2. I think he had 2 matches on camera at the Pro Tour day 2. I really like this list. Also, Zach just won a ProQuest today as I record this with the same list or a very similar list. The thing I like about this list is it really uses that Channel Mount Heroic and looks to get to it and then keep it in play. You can see cards like Whisper of the Oracle, which traditionally I've not been a big fan of, but I think in these kind of this meta where you just want to try and do a really powerful thing, that gets you to a card like Channel Mount Heroic, sets you up for the draws you want to see, and sets you up for cards like Tome of the Arknight. Notice that's in his sideboard. The more core of the plan is a traditional plan. Then you have access to cards like Runic Reclamation. You've got Command and Conquers, of course, things that work really well with the Channel Mount Heroics as well. So I think this is the sort of list that I would probably look at playing, although I think the more traditional list, like we saw from Jacob, like we saw in the Calling Top 8, are also really good options. But yeah, if you want to play a Runeblade that isn't Chane, right now I'd be looking to play something like Briar. Channel Mount Heroic's a fun card. It's a powerful card. So a good option for ProQuest Season 2. There we go. That's the 5 decks for ProQuest Season 2 that I would recommend picking up and playing as we head into these final 2 weeks. Now, if you haven't already, give this video a big, like. If you enjoy what we do here at Arsenal Pass, we do appreciate all the support. You can also subscribe to the channel if you aren't already subscribed. We do also have Patreon. Now, on our Patreon, we throw up extra content like additional podcasts. If you don't already listen to our weekly podcast, you can go and check it out. We also do things like deck guides. When we throw those up on YouTube, we also put like a sideboard guide and sometimes deep dive videos. We've just done that with Chane. You can go and check that out. About to do a sideboard guide for the deck tech with Dash as well, which you can also check out. Plus, we do like analysis videos, ad hoc, things like big events. We've done Brendan's games a few times, just analyzing how to play the deck and what's happening in those matches, sort of replay analysis. Now, with that all said, I hope you enjoy the rest of ProQuest season. These 5 decks, as I say, the good thing about these 5 decks is that all of these lists are really tuned. We've taken these from Calling, Pro Tour, top 8 competitors, top 32 competitors, people have just won ProQuest. So a lot of work and effort has gone into these. And I think you can feel confident to pick them up and go and run them for the remaining 2 weeks. If not, take these as a starting point, go and put your own twist on it, find the things you like to do that work with your play style, and go and crush it out there. But otherwise, until next time, we'll see you in the next video.